We're going live. I'm on. You guys were here. Oh my gosh. This is called non-tech, sort of tech, tech on the phone, disaster. Anyway, we're here. Neal is patiently waiting in the wings, and we are so glad to be here, and we hope you hung in there and that you're here with us. Anyway, hi, everybody. It's been a good week for us. I hope it's been a good week for you. We have been sewing. We have had, I've been working on a shift. Brooke's been working on other things. Shifts coming, right, Brooke? Yeah, eventually. And so we've been doing a bunch of stuff, but I wanted to first give a shout out and say thank you once again for this past week and for your patronage. It means everything. And I wanted to share a little tidbit. Jim comes up to me the other day and he says, I got a note from one of our customers. And I said, yeah. And he said, my stimulus is your stimulus. So we laughed and said, we really appreciate that. We're glad you're sharing your stimulus with us. And on that note, we'd love for you to remember to share it with a lot of the other small businesses out there. They're all just really pushing hard. Here in Virginia, we've opened up a little bit. Supposedly it's 50% in stores. Not that I'm going to be in any stores anytime soon. And they're doing some outdoor restaurant seating. So that's yay for the restaurants. And I've noticed that they've been putting in some amazing safety features in place to protect people. So hopefully they can start to get back to work and get a little bit normality going on. I am going to now share or introduce Neal. I had planned on talking about some other things, but poor guy, he's been sitting here waiting while I hit a lot of buttons and made a big mess. Anyway, without further ado, I want to introduce Neal Hurst, who is the Associate Curator of Textiles and Costume at Colonial Williamsburg. I've known Neal for a very long time. I have watched him go through, not only is he a curator, but I watched him go through the apprenticeship program at Colonial Williamsburg as a tailor and receive his journeyman papers after 7 years of apprenticeship. I also watched him graduate from William and Mary and go on to be a fellow at Winter. He's done lots of amazing things in his lifetime already. So welcome, Neal.
Good afternoon. How are you doing, Angela?
I'm good, except that, I'm trying to calm down from the technical glitches, but I'm good. So, I brought you on today because we're talking about shifts today.
Correct.
All of our participants have been working on their first shift, many of them their very first shift. And I had spoken to you earlier and we had talked about 3 shifts in the collection that are similar in construction as and appearance as the ones that we're going to be looking at. And I wanted to have you give us a little tour of those 3 shifts because we've had lots of questions from people of various things that in regards to construction. A lot of people have asked about things like necklines. And I know one of our shifts that we're going to talk about, the first one that I mentioned to you, actually has a drawstring in the neckline that I think is contemporary to the shift, correct?
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that was one of the questions that I had from people wondering about drawstrings, where they come, where they come in, why they're there, should they be there? What were some of the other things that were really common, Brooke, that questions?
There was a lot of questions about the gusset and the seam, which way the seam gets pressed and folded to make it all lay right and not have the outside going inside. It's something that I know you have a great deal of knowledge
a
about.
great deal of knowledge, because Angela has two left hands. She has an issue with directions. If you tell me to go left, I sometimes go right. And if you tell me to do it forwards, I sometimes do it backwards. But I do have the inside of gussets worked out, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I wanted to ask you, Neal, all the shifts in the collection. For starters, how do you guys go about dating these shifts?
Yeah, it's pretty difficult, quite honestly. And you'll probably notice right off the bat when you look at a lot of the things in the Emuseum, particularly shifts, unless we have a much better provenance to them, they tend to have pretty broad range to them. So, one of the things that does help us a little bit occasionally is the materials that they're made out of, or the threads they're sewn with. Generally speaking, cotton ones tend to be later into the 19th century, early 19th century. Some of the shifts also have cotton sewing threads with them as well, and we tend to think that those are dating to the early 19th century. But it oftentimes is very difficult, and unless we have really solid provenance, and unfortunately, with all three of the ones that we're taking a look at today, we don't have any provenance with them at all.
I know. I know there's the Van Rensselaer, but that one is so fancy, compared to what we're trying to do today. And I wanted to show, we're talking about it, and I moved it over. Here's the shift that I showed everybody last week. And I may have even shown this to you, Neal. It's just a real simple shift like we're making. It was got for me in France and brought home as a gift. It was, they said that they come from nunneries. So, and it was kind of interesting because I noticed somebody else had posted a shift like this that I think they may have owned, built exactly the same way, where they're using the salvage edges as the top and the bottom. Have you ever seen that?
I can't recall one off the top of my head. And I will also sort of preface this that for the three shifts that we're looking at today, I haven't been able to get back into work. So I only have the notes that I have off of our Emuseum and our sort of database system, which are very good, but I haven't actually had a chance to go in and sort of rehandle them.
Yeah.
Plus,
which I hope we get. I hope we get to do someday. That we get to do it.
Yeah.
We'll pick a subject and get to do a little tour with you virtually in collections, which would be super exciting for a lot of people who haven't had an opportunity to be inside collections, have never done it, and they'll get a personal tour where we can ask questions. I was going to say that if Christina is on, she had some good memory of some of the shifts. I think she's come over and seen shifts with you, right?
Yep.
So maybe she can chime in if there's something you don't remember.
Yeah, that's great.
So, I figured, unless somebody has questions at this moment, I thought we might let Neal talk to us a little bit about these three shifts.
Sure.
And he's going to share his screen and show us the actual shifts, which we will put up later for you. I don't know where we can put that at so that they can have the session numbers.
You can put a link in the description of the YouTube.
Oh, there you go. I knew that. Thank you.
All right, so I'll share my screen if that's all right.
Yes, that'd be great.
All right, can you guys see that?
Yes.
All right, I'm just going to back up one and start with this one. Is that good for you guys? Can you all see that?
Can they see it?
Should be able to.
Are they responding?
I can't tell yet because there's a little bit of a delay, remember?
Oh, right. We have a delay whenever we do live. Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is, so there's three shifts that Angela wanted to, three shifts that Angela sort of wanted to take a look at that are in the collection at Colonial Williamsburg. And they closely relate to the styles that folks are making with your sew along, if I am correct. This one is a session number 1986-207. And so it was brought into the collection in 1986. and it was purchased from Cora Ginsburg, probably one of the most well-known dealers in antique costume ever, I'd probably venture to say. Now, Cora Ginsburg provided us with a little bit of information on this shift, and she had it listed as either English or American. It is made from linen, and this is the one that has the neckline that is faced with that tape. Very, very, very narrow tape. It's like 3/8 inch wide, and then there's two eyelets for the drawstring work, so that way if the drawstring came out, or you can sort of remove the drawstring if necessary. This one is dated 1780 to 1810, and Linda Baumgarten dated this one. This is one of the few, if I remember correctly, that we actually have I'm sorry, I apologize. We don't actually have a selvage width on this one. The full width of the fabric itself is 44 inches. I am not entirely sure if that is selvage to selvage, because again, I haven't seen it. I'm more than likely it is. And then of course there you have the gussets that are added into the side there to make the width even larger. So it's probably 44 inches selvage to selvage. So nice wide piece of linen. And this one too, you can also see that they've used these binders. At least we oftentimes see that phrase used later with these little pieces that go up and over top of the section that the sleeve is actually inserted into. I think the Workwoman's Guide might be the earliest reference to that in the 1830s, but these narrow pieces that will then cover up the raw edge once the sleeve is actually inserted into the body of the shift. Nice and narrow. That's also a feature that we see on men's shirts. They tend to be very narrow for the 18th century, and tend to get wider as the century progresses. But this is not something we see frequently, or at least in our collection, on a lot of shifts. It's sort of perhaps an extra piece that's done to help reinforce that area. I think the two other shifts, if I remember correctly, don't have this feature on the interior of them. Another thing that you might look at too is the underarm gusset, which tends to be quite small. Much of this due to the fact that the arm size of the jackets and gowns that women are wearing, their arm size are very small and quite high into the armpit. So you don't really want to have too much bulk going up underneath the arm there. But certainly an option to have a drawstring in the neckline there and a casing if you want it.
Okay. Can I ask you a question, Neal,
Yeah.
or make an observation?
Sure, absolutely.
Those the actual reinforcements that are around the arm's eye. That's something you see in men's shirts.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you see it quite often.
But it's unusual, you think, for a shift.
I'm judging solely on examples that we have in our collection.
Right.
I haven't really done an extensive study on shifts. But you do see it regularly on men's shirts.
Right. Okay. Let's see the next one. Any
Sure.
questions about this one?
Yeah, you can also just collect up questions too, and we can ask them in the end and go back to them if you want.
Okay. Yep. She's writing things down.
Oh, great. Perfect. All right, this guy here. Now, this one's kind of interesting, and it's been possibly attributed to Scandinavia, and I'm not entirely sure why, but Linda Baumgarten and Cora Ginsburg both have some notes on it with some comparisons to other Scandinavian museum pieces. So I need to kind of follow up on those. These notes were taken in 1983. So I need to kind of see maybe perhaps some of these museums have actually put these objects online to kind of compare them and see why they're actually saying that this piece is potentially Scandinavian. But we do have it listed as Europe or as European. It was purchased from Cora Ginsburg in 1983. And it does have a very interesting 1-inch piece of lace that is sewn into the neckline of this shift. It dates to about 1780 to 1810. It is made out of linen. I think I said that already. And The selvage width of this is 31 inches wide. I know this comes up over and over and over again. I know people constantly ask, what are your typical widths of linens? And they range greatly, and we can really see that in shifts and shirts that survive. This one is also very interesting in the fact that there is no shoulder seam. So this is cut on the fold at the shoulder. So a little bit different than, it's just another way of actually cutting out a shift. But you'll notice that this one still does have the gussets that are inserted into the sides. But what is interesting, the underarm gussets, if I'm reading the notes that Linda left, the underarm gussets are actually made of a finer material. And so it's a different material than the rest of the garment. Now she just calls them gussets, so I'm wondering if
Is Neal's volume gone?
Oh.
It says, Neal, you're coming and going for some people.
I'm sorry. At any rate, I will say that Linda Baumgarten did leave notes that the underarm, I believe what she's talking about is the underarm gussets, that they are actually made from a much finer material. However, she might be referring to the side gores. I'm not quite sure, and I haven't had a chance to take a closer look at this one. But judging by the photos that we see on the screen here, I'm pretty sure it is the underarm gusset. And once again, the gussets are pretty tiny.
Is the lace contemporary to the piece, do they think?
It appears so. Yeah, it appears to be bobbin lace.
And we did have somebody who asked if they could put lace at the neckline, and we have an example now.
Yeah, certainly an example. However, it may be European or Scandinavian.
Sure. Okay. So
This one is also marked. I don't know if you get a chance to see it. And in fact, let me see if I can change photos here. If it will let me. But in the center front there, you can see the RDP that's worked in cross stitch.
Yeah. And that's very common, right, Neal?
Yeah.
To mark the linens. And they were marked for ownership, so that when they went to laundry, that they'd know whose shift was whose, correct?
Yeah, when you start washing, let's say 20, 30 shifts at a time, and it's nothing but white linen, it can be hard to identify everybody's individual piece.
Exactly. And laundresses specialized in just doing whites, correct?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
There are individuals who are just washing those things, and in fact, in America, we find several primary sources. I'll talk about how white the whites are here. John Harrower being one of them, who mentions that one, he can wear a clean shirt every single day if he wanted to, and that the whites themselves are whiter than he's ever seen.
And they must have a laundry secret, you think?
Well, maybe
that or such a strong sun in Virginia that it bleaches it quicker.
It might be that, but it also, you figure in England they're primarily burning coal versus wood, so maybe that has something to do with it as well.
Right.
And so for the last one here, let me just switch over. Is this shift, which was acquired by Colonial Williamsburg in 1940 by a woman named Eleanor Merrill. We believe it's American, but I'm not sure if there really is no provenance with this piece in particular. So we don't know who actually wore it. But interestingly enough, that this one in particular, it was cut as one. There is no side gusset in it at all, and it has just been laid out flat and cut. And the full width of the fabric is 37 inches at the bottom. So again, another pretty wide piece of linen for the 18th century. Again, we see those sort of typical tiny underarm gussets, which are nice to see, and sort of a shaped neckline as well. This one doesn't have any kind of sort of tape or anything or drawstring in it. It's been turned and hemmed. This one, I've spent a little bit of time with this one a while ago, and it is very coarse.
Yeah,
and
very coarse linen.
pretty heavy material. So kind of an interesting difference between a lot of the ships that we had that survive in our collection at Williamsburg, which tend to be, a much finer piece of linen. This one, I would say is in sort of the world of linen, fairly coarse example. It also appears, I know it looks very, very white on our screen here, but it is almost like a half bleach or even a brown linen. There's some serious tide lines on it. It must have gotten wet in some time in its life and then dried. But it's actually much darker than what you actually see on your screen here.
Yeah, that I know that in the description it talked about it being natural, and certainly it could have been just a brown linen, a natural linen, and it had bleached over time.
Yep, could be.
Due to age, and that's when you get that creamy, tanny coloring of a half bleached linen.
Right.
The other thing that one of the reasons I picked this too was number one, the coarse linen that it was made from. Number two, that it had that shorter sleeve, which would be more appropriate for your later period where you're getting into these shorter sleeves and puff sleeves, things like that, when you get into the Regency period. And also the other thing too was the fun comparison, like you said, most of the linens being finer. And I know that a couple of people asked about thread counts, and I found that in looking at linens, especially looking in the Foundling collection and taking sort of a census of the thread counts of just bleached linen, I was finding anywhere from this coarse 30, 40 thread count up to over 100. And I think that the shifts, for the ones like the one you just previously showed, I think was a 50 to 60 thread count. That seems to be kind of average from what I'm gathering for these undergarments. So it's a fairly fine linen.
Yeah, I would say it's fine, but I think the biggest thing is it's sturdy.
Yes.
I tend to think that when we purchase linens today, when we start to think of fine, it gets thinner and thinner and thinner,
Sure, yeah.
so to speak. But in this case, they're just really cramming in the threads per inch.
Right. So it's really that it's a very fine yarn, but it's compact.
I think so. Yeah, that's probably the best way to describe it.
Well, those are great. So do we have questions about these?
We have a lot of questions.
A lot of questions.
I'll try my best.
So we'll probably leave the share up in case you have to flip back and forth, but go ahead.
So one of the common questions recently is about the silk marking in the shifts. You mentioned that one of them is marked with silk thread, and they want to know, is there a common color? What's the best weight to use? How do you keep it from going bad in the wash? How does it do in washes?
That's a great question, and unfortunately, it's sort of a gamble that you take. Probably the most common one that I've seen on, probably the two most common ones that I see on men's and women's things are either red or blue.
Right.
You occasionally do see them worked in white, though. At least on a few men's shirts I have, you'll see things like initials worked in white on sometimes on the shoulder, sometimes on the hem. But red and blue by far seem to be the most common colors you find for marking. But yeah, you certainly are going to take a risk no matter what if you don't try. If you say you don't, let's say, try to test it on something and run it through the wash. One of my, and Brooke, you probably remember this story from Mark Hutter when he made that one extremely fine shirt for a customer through the Margaret Hunter shop. Beautiful shirt, finished it up, and I think he had marked it in red and then it ran, if I remember correctly. So it happens, unfortunately. They are dealing with, of course, vegetable dyes at this point, and so they're gonna deal with the same thing. So it's just it's a little risky, but it does happen.
And red is fugitive to this day, unfortunately. And they've changed. We had a period of time where red was not very fugitive. And then they took away all the chemicals that made it not that way. And now it's fugitive again. Matter of fact, I was going to point out that this shift was originally marked in red, which has since bleached to sort of a pinky tone.
Yeah, it's pinky yellow.
Yeah, exactly.
The next most common question asked is if shifts can be made out of muslin or cotton sheeting, or the fine muslin even that we have on our website.
Right. So that's the fine muslin is too fine. It's not going to hold up. It is your underwear and it needs some durability. But the other thing with the cotton, and like Neal, you had said, you really don't start seeing cotton underwear until the 19th century. And even then, you still see a lot of linen surviving all the way up until you get into mid-century, really.
Yep.
Where they're still using linen, and there's reasons for that. Christina touched on that last week as far as hygiene is concerned, and also the fact that linen is a harder wearing fiber than cotton, and because they haven't learned to mercerize, it's even harder wearing than cotton earlier on in the century. So, anything to add to that, Neal?
No, I mean, I think we probably have more references to cotton shirts and shifts than we actually have survivors. So they're around, but they're certainly not as common.
Right. And that's also ambiguous too, because of the whole reference in England of them saying cotton, when in reality they're referring to a linen and cotton textile, not a 100% cotton textile. So when you're seeing it in print, it's hard to know how you're seeing it, whether you're seeing that a true cotton or this Manchester good instead.
Back to the marking that's done. What location do they tend to be marked? Can it be somewhere besides the center? And also, like, what's the preferred kind of stitch to use?
Yeah, you generally you do see it at center front, but you also see it sort of closer to the bottom near the hem, but up a little bit. You find them up a couple inches from the bottom, and those are probably the most typical places for men's shirts as well. But you also see them on the shoulder for men's shirts occasionally. You also have the option. What's that?
Where on the shoulder?
Right on the shoulder strap.
Oh,
Sometimes it's out here.
I've never seen that. That's cool.
A few in collections.
Speaking of that, there's some questions about the reinforcement strips that you see on shirts and shifts, whether they're on the inside or the outside, and you have to have them. I know Christina said that, about half the shifts that she's seen have all the reinforcements.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I find striking when I look at antique shirts and shifts is that if you could get 10 18th century shirts or 20 of them, or 20 18th century shifts, and ones that are truly proven to be dating to then, I find such a great diversity in terms of construction and construction styles. And I think a lot of that is the fact that they are not necessarily apprentice trained to actually produce these things. Unlike if you put, let's say, 10 waistcoats out or 10 gowns out, you're going to find a lot more things that are typically found in all of them, construction wise. But when you look at these certain ones, like the shifts, for example, you are going to find some pretty broad diversity in terms of how they are put together. And Christina's probably about right. It's sort of 50-50 with things like shoulder straps and various other means of binders that go into the interior. But they certainly do help with the wear, no matter what. These undergarments really take a beating, constant washing, constant abrasion. So those areas are put in, those reinforcements areas are put in there for a reason. You can always leave them out, but I think the longevity of your shirt or shift will be greatly extended if it is put in there.
So from a practical standpoint, I can say that where my shifts start to deteriorate is in the shoulders.
Okay.
And so it's a perfect place to put it.
you know, for myself, thinking back, you know, when I was in costume every single day, wearing 18th century shirts, you know, the place that I find that wore out the quickest for me is the collar. And I think that's just being lazy and not shaving. Um, but you know, generally I had a pretty pretty long life to most of my shirts when I made them. Wristbands are always a problem, you know, a lot of abrasion there. But you see on some examples, and even you know the shifts that have sort of
That
the
have the wristband. Yeah.
yeah, that have the cuffs on them or wristbands.
Or, well, the cuff. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, you find some examples have that mice teeth that are worked on the very edge, which essentially is a series of knots that are worked on the end to again help with that abrasion on that folded edge, because otherwise that folded edge again takes a lot of wear and tear. Um, so yeah, you do find quite a bit of option, but you know, when I'm making those things, you know, I generally try to add them in because one, I see them in the period, and I think they tend to last longer when you do add them in. And just to get back to Brooks, one question about stitches that are being used. Generally, it's worked in cross stitch, but also I have yet to find one that's worked in what is often called marking stitch, meaning that it's sort of reversible. Just a thought there. It's usually worked with cross stitch, and the back's a mess usually. You also see them occasionally marked in ink. You know, you find recipes for indelible ink in the period, and I've seen a number in collections that have names and numbers on them where they are marked in ink.
Yeah. Okay. Other questions?
Fortunately, Christina's jumped into the live chat on YouTube and is answering some of them for us.
Okay.
So we don't need to talk about a few of the things, but it just brought up about how many shifts would people normally have and like how valuable were they? And she mentioned that she's seen an inventory where went as high as having 24 shifts. I was curious if Neal has seen you know, the certain quantities of shirts or shifts showing up.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly do in various inventories. Of course, inventories are taken at the end of one's life, so it's hard to get a picture over the entirety of a single individual. Um, but you know, Lord Botetots, you know, again, he is the highest person in Virginia in terms of wealth and stature. You know, had a huge number of shirts. I think it was 56 ruffled shirts and 6 plain, if I remember off the top of my head. I have to
Sounds
check.
about right.
Yeah. So, you know, that's a huge amount of linens for one individual, you would
Right.
think. But, you know, these things range in quality and quantity. Not everybody is going to be spending the same amount of money on shirts and shifts as somebody else. I don't think even necessarily your wealth, you know, really dictates that. We know that Robert Carter is giving 2 shifts per slave for each season.
Right.
You know, it varies quite a bit. But really, what the more important takeaway is the textile is going to be the more expensive part of the garment. So depending on what you choose for that textile, that's going to be the most expensive. The labor may be completely free, particularly if you're going to be making it yourself.
Right. Well, and that brings up a question regarding how these shirts and shifts are finding their way into the world. We talked last week about the fact that the mantua maker, the dressmaker, might be one who would have these shirts and shifts as ready-mades.
And
Where
the
you could,
milliner too.
right, the milliner, where you could go into a shop and purchase. Is there anybody that's done anything that has given us any indication of how much home industry is going on where people are building their own shirts and shifts?
Yeah, I think there's probably a little bit out there, but you know, it's going to be individuals who like to record a lot of things in their diaries.
Yeah. So
Um,
it's hard to know.
it is hard to know. I think Martha Ballard talks about making shirts and shifts in her diary. Um, you know, John Harrower, I believe, also talks about hiring a woman to make some shirts for him, if I remember correctly. So, you know, there is a lot of hiring out of that type of work being done in the period. At least that's my sense of it. Is that if you don't want to spend the time and do it yourself, or you don't have the time, then there is certainly somebody out there who is willing to make a shirt or a shift for you, or multiples of them for you.
One of the things that we brought up too, as part of the host series, is the idea that you're using your best sewing skills for
Yep.
shirts and shifts for durability. In what you have looked at, have you discovered a wide range of sewing expertise, or does it tend to be fairly across the board that it's fairly good sewing?
Yeah, it's fairly good sewing. The sewing that you find on them is what the fabric will allow, if that makes sense. So it's not over sewn by any means, but it's not under sewn either. So they tend to be worked very, very, very well. The joins, if you have a selvage join, they're very neatly done. Any kind of felling where you're turning in those raw edges tends to be very, very neatly done as well. Back stitching for those seams, tends to be very neatly done. So it's generally very good quality sewing, but it's what the fabric allows. So that coarser shift doesn't have as fine of sewing as, let's say the shift on the screen here now.
Right, because it's heavier, it's harder to get your needle through it. You're not going to be able to make as fine of a stitch with it.
Yeah, there's just there's less ends per the inch. So
Right.
there's a lot less fiber there. So you
Mhm.
can't do 30 stitches to the inch
Exactly.
on that.
Without it
But
pulling apart.
yeah, but
So,
they chose that fabric for a reason.
yeah. So that brings up a question, because you've mentioned that with the having a good selvage edge and doing basically a butt seam.
Mhm.
Is that something that you see, or do you ever see the selvage edge stitched with the back stitch, as a seam?
I've certainly seen them joined, but I'm not sure if I've seen it seamed. I can't remember off the top of my head. I have to go back and take a look at these.
Well, then I'm going to have an interesting challenge, because I'm using the selvage edge on one side. Of course, my fabric is wider, so I can only do it on one side. But then I've got my gores, my bottom gores going in. So it's going to be kind of a interesting thing to make all that join together nicely if I do butt seaming. So we'll see how that works.
Yeah, and they got tricky themselves too.
Yeah,
Again, they're trying to cut these things out with the least amount of fabric as possible. So,
right.
Mhm.
in fact, that last one here that we've been talking about, that coarser one,
Mhm.
I believe, if I remember correctly, and sorry, I haven't been able to get back into work,
It's
but
okay.
I believe this one is pieced as well using the selvage. So, but I'll see if I can come up with some follow-up notes on this one, and maybe some photos that will do it a little bit better justice.
That would be great. I think Brooke has another question.
Well, Neil mentioned people are trying to get best use of fabric, and we had a question from someone about if you can cut the shift across the grain, because they only want theirs to be 60 inches from hem to hem, and they were wondering if they can go across to save fabric, because they don't need to run the length.
Right, right. It probably wasn't even an option in the 18th century, but it is an option today because we have fabric that wide.
And the thing is linen wise, my comment would be, see how dimensionally stable the linen is. In other words, pull it from selvage to selvage, then pull it the other way. And if you get equal amounts of pull, then it's what I call dimensionally stable. And it won't matter whether you go cross grain or grain. If you find you have pull more one way than the other, you might struggle with it a little and get wedgy. It might get wedgy on you when you're sewing.
Or after you wash it.
Yeah, or after you watch it. Yeah.
Now, since a lot of people have bought fabric that's 60 inches wide, and they don't necessarily, and they can't do two shifts with it because of the width that they need their body to be,
Mm-hmm.
more than 30.
Mm-hmm.
What's a good use for the extra fabric, especially if they've chosen like a cambric?
Cap, a triangular neckerchief, which can also be pieced down the center back if you need it, if you need to do it in pieces. Some are very fine mitts, sleeve ruffles, a tucker, which is a neck ruffle, That's with cambric, and even with some of the really finer, shirt shifts, you can do some things with that too.
What about for the guys?
For the guys, you could do a neck stock, right?
Yep.
Neal?
Yeah, sure.
Neck stock. They could do a cap,
A cravat, roller, ruffles
what
for the
else?
shirt.
Huh?
Ruffles for the shirt.
Ruffles for the shirt. Yep. You could have bosom ruffles and cuff ruffles if you wanted. What else?
Lining for things, pocket
yeah.
bags, pockets for ladies. I mean,
Yep.
be creative. I mean,
Yep.
there's a huge amount of things
Yep.
that you can reuse these sort of odd bits of cabbage left over.
Right. Especially bleached linen. Bleached linen is like, it's like keeping, I don't know, white thread in your sewing box. Everybody needs some.
In regards to the actual construction of a lot of the seams, especially around the lovely sleeves in regards to that gusset piece, what are some extra tips or tricks to making sure that all works out right?
On the antiques, they do vary quite a bit, but generally what I find, at least when I'm sort of making them, I tend to sew the underarm gusset on first and then fell it, and then sew the long sleeve seam, so catching the gusset, going down the sleeve itself, and then you're when you do fell it, you're going to roll it over top of. It's going to fell towards the other seam that you've actually felt. So it's not going to go the other way. So then you kind of get this weird intersection. So it'll actually roll over top of it to sort of help encase that area to make sure that it's not going to unravel in any way.
And I was going to say, those are some of the tricks that Christina can share for our last.
Oh, good. Yeah.
So, because we'll talk about those reinforcements and how to put them in. And I know some people had questions about construction in respects to like the underarm gusset. I think what you really need to do is you need to go back and look at the video very slowly, piece by piece, and kind of follow along, because I did it myself just to make sure that I was doing everything in the same way that Christina did it. And it made a lot of sense. But one of the questions I know that people asked, and I'll put it up here, I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but this is my underarm gusset. I now have my my sleeves done, and it is done with that offset.
If Neal could unshare the image on the screen, then it'll be large enough for everyone to see.
Yeah. Unshare.
I did.
Oh, okay. Oh, you didn't. Oh, maybe you did.
Yes, I did. It's unshared.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Technically challenged. I'm just being honest. Okay. So if you look at this, you will see that this is my seam, and then it is folded in towards the gusset. That was a question that several people had. And yes, I've done it the other way too, but this makes it neater when you get to this part, because you're going ahead and completely construct, you're stitching and then felling this, and then you're coming over doing this part and continuing your felling all the way down your seam. So that makes it nice and neat. You have a little bit of a bump here, but it's really nothing. I mean, it really comes out very neatly. But the trick is you want to fold towards your gusset, and that goes for your side gussets too. You want to fold towards the gusset, and that will make for a neater seam when you get ready to stitch up your side seams. So, but what were some of the other questions people had construction, and Neal can add to that too.
Actually, we have there's a really good question in terms of construction, in the sense of how you can tell the difference between a shift that or a shirt that maybe is European versus American. Are there differences in shifts the more tropical you get, like in the Caribbean or the Southern colonies? I know this is something that Neal has looked a lot into,
Right.
warmer weather clothing, but do you see that in undergarments?
Yeah, there is a lot of talk about sort of the use of actually cotton for the summertime, and so that seems to be an option for individuals. Cotton shirts and then cotton shifts, particularly in the Caribbean, a little bit in the Southern colonies as well, but not as much mentioned.
Is it India cotton that they're getting India cotton?
Have no clue, honestly.
How early does it go that they're referring to it, that you would suspect that it truly is cotton?
Um, I think because they're distinguishing it as being cotton, my assumption that it is cotton, but until we have an example,
Right.
or
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to say. I think thin fabrics for those hot climates too. Something maybe even thinner than the cambric that you guys offer. Even it sounds crazy, but there is no way to keep cool otherwise. But they realize the need of having that protective layer of underwear on.
What about construction techniques they were asking in respects to, like Linda came up with the idea that they thought this was Scandinavian,
Yeah,
this.
I think some of that is not necessarily just sort of coming up with it, but in the fact where Cora Ginsburg probably purchased it. So that is probably the only place that we can kind of get a sense of, but also comparing it to others that survive in this case. So they're probably, at least in 1983, unless this was, and I don't know when the last time this record was updated because I didn't check. But looking at others that survive at that point in time, to compare it to the one that actually survives. But my gut is that because Cora kept such great records, is that she probably purchased it on the continent, probably in Scandinavia.
Okay.
So I don't. There are ways. I am sure there are ways to tell the difference between French and let's say English shirts. Diderot talks about them, and there are some very specific construction techniques that vary greatly in men's shirts. I haven't taken a look at what Diderot and Guerceau say about shifts, but I suspect that if there is a difference, they would probably mention it, at least between French and English.
Very interesting. So anyone who is French speaking out there that wants to do a little research for us, we'd love to have you read Diderot and tell us what they say.
Well, I know that Adam Hodges Leclerc has done quite a bit on Guerceau, and we've chatted quite a bit. But there are some very distinctive differences, particularly up around the neck, that the French tend to do versus what the English do.
Yeah. So it'd be nice to know if we have that same information for shifts too.
Yeah.
That would really be good.
So another question that we had last week, and it continues to come up because it's a very good question, is about the use of cuffs on ladies' shifts and the time when you start to see that falling out. When is the switch from full sleeves with a cuff that it's been gathered into it the same way you would find on a man's shirt, to a time when it's much narrower without a cuff? And also, a question for you, Neal, that I have is, do you see a difference throughout this 18th century in men's sleeves, not losing the cuff, but do the sleeves get less full as you get
Less
later?
bulky. Yeah.
Yeah, we have probably one of the best shifts that we have in our collection at Colonial Williamsburg is one that was worn by Anne Van Rensselaer. And that shift probably dates to the mid 1780s, and it has a cuff on it. And so I think you're probably going to see a long transition period from when gowns start to have shorter and shorter sleeves, or longer and longer sleeves for that matter, depending on the style that you're choosing, that you're going to find that transition with the shift as well. So as those styles begin to change, moving into the more neoclassical sort of stylings, you're probably going to start seeing that change rapidly as well. So you're probably going to have a 20-30 year span where this is changing.
That one image that we use from Garçon shows the type of shift that we're making. And I believe that has a date of 1771.
Yeah, or earlier. I
Yeah,
can't
or
remember.
earlier.
If-
Yeah, because
So
it could have
yeah,
been a reprinting, whatever.
yeah. That series
Um,
was a long time printing.
yeah. So yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I don't know if women are going out and chopping off the cuffs off their sleeves, but
Mhm.
maybe they are if they're really quickly adopting new fashions and changing their wardrobes rapidly. But I suspect that most people are a little bit more sensible, and you have your shift with cuffs that are worn with these couple gowns that you're still wearing, and then you have another set of shifts that are made probably with to go with maybe a newer style or one of the more neoclassical styles that's also coming into fashion.
I know that the Van Rensselaer one too, isn't that one a very fine linen, and then it is ironed into pleats so
Yes.
that it actually creates a very tight fitting arm,
Yeah.
and could easily go through a narrow sleeve.
Yeah, it's fully pattern ironed, so it's
Yeah,
it's was put away the last time it was ironed and never touched again. So
yeah, it's amazing.
and she had there's two other sort of maybe bed gowns, short gown kind of things. They also been interpreted as sort of nursing attire, but they survive, and they are also very short waisted, and so my guess is they date to probably around the 1790s, and they still have cuffs, long sleeves, but they
Mm,
still have cuffs that are gathered with ruffles on them.
mm, interesting. Well, we'll have to do a talk where you just show us all the Van Rensselaer goodies that are in the
It's
collection.
it's an
You have
amazing
some,
collection, and
yeah, you
great.
have lovely things. Yeah.
Did he comment about the men's sleeves? If
Oh,
you
I'm sorry,
mention
Brooke.
them?
Oh,
Sorry,
Uh,
I like to
fairness. Yeah.
ask multiple part questions.
No,
Yeah.
that's fine. Men's sleeves, I think they generally start pretty full because they're filling in that large open cuff that is very fashionable earlier in the century.
Like how wide?
Um, I think they might be pretty wide, but I'm guessing the fabric would be fairly fine.
Hmm.
I don't know. I can't think off the top of my head. Probably perhaps as much as 30 inches. I mean, it's hard to say.
If you look at art from that time period, it's very voluminous, but it has that very fine appearance
Yeah.
aesthetically. So, yeah.
But I think one of the things that really marks an early shirt, though, from a later shirt is how the ruffles are on, particularly the sleeves. Because generally, you'll find the ruffles going down the vent of the sleeve, around the cuff, and then back down the vent again. That style tends to be very early. Mid-century early-ish in terms of, but there are so few shirts. I know of one that actually shows that survive. I mean, there are so few 18th century shirts that survive. It's mind-boggling in
Doesn't
comparison.
doesn't Mark Wallace own one of them?
That's the only one that I know of.
Yeah. I guess we need to get him on here to show us his shirt. So did you have any other questions for us, Brooke?
Well, I know next week, Christina's going to address the neckline and how we do a neckline in the shift.
Mhm.
There's definitely interest in what you all have talked about before about, can there be a drawstring? Can there be lace on it? But there are some people asking about, can they do ones that are like completely dropped off the shoulder so it doesn't show at all? Or like how wide and low can they cut it so it doesn't show with a ball gown or a more formal gown?
Yeah. Well, I know this is just from the experience of having so many friends who've worn 18th century clothes every day for years upon years. And I know that some, when they are working with if they're putting on a fine ball gown that has a very open neckline, they'll pull it down so that it's in this area here. And then as far as down here, they may go reach and pull their shift neckline so that it's below their stay neckline, because their stayed neckline is typically just above that is where your actual neckline for your gown should be. So that means a wide neckline. So it's something that you can kind of experiment with. I know I have a shift that's large in the neckline, and I tend to pull it way down and way out so that I do wear a strap stay so that it is right underneath the straps and right below the line of my stays, so that I don't have to worry about, shifts picking. The worst thing you can do is to cut your neckline too small, but by the same token, Christina's going to talk to you about cutting your neckline and taking your time and slowly opening that neckline up until it's a pleasing neckline for you. And then you can always go back and put in a drawstring if you make a mistake. So there you are. So, where are we with time? We've still got a few more minutes. We're really sorry, you guys, that we were so late. It was like totally technical havoc. Do you have more questions for Neal while we got him? He's our captive presenter here. I would love it, Neal, if we could do something in the future once things get a little bit more back to normal. I know that it's exciting that you're going to be moving collections into the new museum in the next week or so, correct?
Yeah, hopefully by next Friday, the collection is going to be moving back to the museum. It had always been there, but it had moved to the collections facility off-site for the renovation project, but that's now done, and we will be moving the collection back over and setting up in the two new locations of where costume storage is currently kept at. So hopefully once things start to clear up a little bit more, we can resume taking appointments and have folks come and take a look.
Right. And that would be wonderful. And Neal is very wonderful about appointments. You just have to have a plan and contacting. So, and we do periodically go over as part of our workshops to see something that might be in reference to a workshop that we're doing. And by the way, I didn't even mention that part. Neal is also one of our workshop presenters. He does most of our men's workshops. He's done all things men, right? You've done everything from underwear out to coats, which are very labor intensive. I don't ever want to build one. But this fall, he's going to be doing a breeches workshop for us. And if things go weird, we're going to figure out how to do virtual everything if we have to this year, but we will be back to having our men's workshops. And actually, Neal this past year did a cloak workshop for us, right?
Writing habits.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You did writing habits, but you also did cloaks, right? Yeah. Was that the year before?
It's just making lots of ladies' clothing.
Yeah, he's making lots of ladies' clothing. Well, the writing habits we want to do again, but we have to like pinch him a few times. Because that's it's a wonderful one, and
maybe I'll teach it.
Yeah,
haha.
Yeah, Brooke's gonna fight you for the writing habits. You'll probably let her have it, right? Sure, right.
Neal, what are you currently working on in your sewing? I know you've been posting pictures on your Instagram. Maybe not everyone who's here maybe doesn't know what your specialty is.
I don't know if it's a specialty, but I've currently got a bunch of hunting shirts that I'm working on for a bunch of different individuals. So currently working on that. There's about 12 that I've got to complete. And then hopefully have a couple projects kind of in the works with a couple different museums. So stay tuned. Stay tuned for that. A lot of 19th century stuff, which I'm not my usual, but good folks who are looking for some good quality reproductions.
And Neal has done a number of reproductions for museums. And he, as far as the hunting frock goes, he's like the best guy out there to do it, because he actually did a huge amount of research when he was in his undergraduate program and wrote his final thesis on hunting frocks, right? And that is out there to be downloaded, correct?
Absolutely free.
Yeah, so if you look up Neal Hurst, it'll probably come up with some various things, lots of things.
Well,
And one of
we can
those,
put links to both of his
we can,
articles, his one on
yeah,
hunting shirts, and then
and the
also the
one on,
one from when he was at Winterthur
right,
on
his
the.
master's for
Yeah.
his thesis for his master's.
Here's a construction question for you, Neal, that someone just asked about the finishing on necks and sleeves. Is it ever done finer than the actual body of the shirt, because those things are going to be seen?
Not that I can think of. I mean, the only thing that might change that a little bit is, of course, how they're putting in the tape on the neckline. And I don't think it's necessarily finer. It just looks different. But from the ones that I can remember off the top of my head, I don't believe there's anything that's done any finer anywhere else on the garment.
Okay. Well, we're getting close to time, so I've got a couple of things here. We will be rolling out our next video on next Wednesday. That's our final on shifts. We're taking a week off, I think.
Taking a week off?
Taking a week off, and then we will be coming back with a bed gown sew along, and that is going to be done. Brooke's going to do that one. I did the pattern many years ago. Again, Lauren from Wearing History, who is Wonder Woman, turned it into an e-pattern for me and actually graded it for me, because it was only graded to the size that I wanted. And we will have that, and she will be teaching that class for you. And also we've, here we go. And Brooke just handed me, I had put a picture of this out. This is one of the 2 caps that we're going to be offering you for the final sew along to get your kit together. This is one that I drafted, and it's based on some caps I have in my own collection and portraiture. And then Brooke is working on one that's going to be more of a round eared one, but they're both fairly simple to do. And with all the shift work that you're doing, you're going to get lots of practice with your fine sewing and making it better. And I also wanted to give a shout out to Sarah Woodyard. Some of you may be following her on Sewn Stories, and she actually does private classes for plain sewing. So if you feel like you want to up your game, or if you feel uncomfortable sewing, or if you want some just some one-on-one time, Sarah's your lady. So check her out on Instagram at Sewn Stories, and you can get her web channel and all, her web channel and all that from there.
She's also on YouTube.
And she's also on YouTube. I think she started a channel on YouTube. So there's lots of people out there that you can get great information from. Don't forget about our hashtags, distance socializing. And now we've got all of our hashtags for all of your kit, which I know you don't have your stays, but we've talked about that. And if you don't want to deal with that, you can do ready-made stays. If you want to go down that path, there are patterns out there, but we will also be, we're talking about, it's in the talking stages now, but we will be producing a YouTube video on construction of stays. So that's something that if you want to hang in there till July, we'll have something for you on that. It'll be probably end of July. So lots and lots for you to do, lots to keep you busy. I'll tell you, Neal, I think we're going to see a whole lot of folks out there in their first 18th century kit. It's going to be exciting.
Yeah.
And I would love to do the same thing with the guys. You think we could get them on board?
Maybe.
Well, start shouting it out. Let's do it. Let's get them out there. We'll have a whole
one last question for Neal.
Okay.
They want to know if you have a dream project of something you've always wanted to make, just like some people have a dream of making like a Worth gown reproduction.
Oh, right.
What is your dream project? And you can't say hunting shirts, then that you've already done it.
No, that is not a dream project.
That's a lot of fine sewing, right?
Yeah. I like a lot of literature references, and not necessarily 18th century literature, but later writings. But I've always wanted to put together Billy Bones's sea chest from Treasure Island, which included a 1740s brand new suit of broadcloth. One of those things I'd always like to build for myself is a nice a little bit earlier than mid-century, broadcloth suit.
Yeah, that would be great. Now you do have a picture of you in a earlier suit
I do.
when you were still
Yep.
an apprentice. Now, was
Yep.
that something that was built in the tailor shop?
Yeah, it was. We did that for a fashion show.
That was,
I don't know
gosh,
if it was
it's
for
longer ago than I want to remember.
or something else. I can't remember off
Yeah.
the top of my head, but that's probably the earliest suit that I've ever. Well, I did build a couple 17th century suits, but the earliest 18th century suit that I've built is
Right.
the 17,
And
late
you
20s.
looked very handsome in it.
That's the one I have all the photos. I took the photos of you at the Capitol of,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Oh, I think we'll need to share that on our Facebook page. I think so.
It was pretty incredible suit, that's for sure.
Yeah, it was amazing.
It was. Well, it looks like we are coming to time, and I looked at my little list here. I don't see anything else that we need to talk about. We've got lots of things planned for you as always. And we thank you, Neal. It was
Okay.
so great to have you, and I hope I get to have you on again soon. Neal has so much to share, so much knowledge and information to share, and we really enjoy having him, and we enjoy having him with workshops too. It's been great. So I and Neal are going to say,
And Brooke.
and Brooke, hey, Brooke, yeah, Brooke over there, the disembodied voice. When we get social distancing over with, Brooke and I will be on together sometimes. So that will be nice. And I'll be able to have people here with me. I'll be able to invite you personally and be able to talk to you and not look at you on a little screen. So that'll be nice. But until we see you guys, remember that we roll out on Wednesday, 10 a.m. We'll be here next Friday at 3:30. We don't have a guest for next week as it stands, but we might. So you need to stay tuned to all of our social media, and we'll let you know what we do. So again, thank you, Neal. We really appreciate it.
Anytime.
And we'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Likewise.
Bye for now. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.